Hello, everyone. Welcome to this Business Advisory Services update. Today, I'm joined by Priscilla B. Smith, Director of Cloud9 Services in Brisbane. Hi, Priscilla. How are you?
Welcome everyone. I'm privileged to be here at the exclusive interview with you. We call it Meet the Experts because we believe Peter is the expert in our group. And so we always come back and give you the updates of what's in the financial world. Today, we're going to talk about the three new ways of alternative funding for small business, which Peter is very, very accomplished in these subjects. He's done a lot of work and also a few presentations lately. So welcome, Peter, and let's talk about the three new trends in alternative funding.
Yeah, well, the three new trends we're looking at are equity crowdsource funding, the Business Growth Fund, which nothing much is happening at present, and government grants. So let's move into it and we'll get started. Priscilla?
So what is happening with crowdsource funding equity raising these days? I know that it started a while ago, and but recently in Australia. So how it evolved during COVID period?
Yeah, good question. I spoke to the managing director of BIZTOOls, who are at this stage Australia's leading crowdsource funding intermediary, a couple of days ago, and he indicated that after they had some initial problems when COVID-19 occurred, they then found that they were able to move into a situation where their business ended up bigger than what it had in 2019. So in 2020, they did more than what they undertook in 2019. And he expects that 2021 will be a bumper year because companies are looking to where they can get funding from. It's going to be fairly difficult for a lot of businesses to negotiate arrangements with banks. We're going to talk about one of the loan opportunities a little bit later in this conversation today. But generally, it is a lot more difficult for SMEs to get funding from banks at present because the banks have already spent probably what they were going to allocate to small businesses over the next 2 years. They've spent it in the last 6 or 7 months, and they'll be looking to reduce it. So, one of the big issues is that businesses that might have a good future, have some fans, have a leadership team that's got a fire burning in their belly wanting to do things. I think those types of entities should seriously be looking at crowdsource funding as a way for which they can go.
I can't see your slides.
Yeah, you're right now.
Yeah, so we talked about crowdsource funding, how it evolved, and it is a new way of raising capital for small business. So it is a controversial there where we have to make sure that people understand what's the difference between crowdsource funding um, and crowdsource funding equity raising.
Okay, well, the
So
crowdsource funding equity raising has been brought about by amendments to the Corporations Act. It's a federal act of parliament, and it has all the power of the law. The crowdfunding concept has been around a bit longer in Australia, and it's basically where someone wants to start an appeal to assist someone that's fallen on hard times. It might be there's been an accident or a major illness, and perhaps they need to obtain specialist medical care that's going to cost a lot of money. So it's an appeal, but at the end of it, the donor gets nothing other than the self-happiness, satisfaction that they've helped someone out. And that's fair enough, but they're not obtaining shares in a company, which is what they're doing with crowdsource funding equity raising. And there's really no laws to protect. There's no consumer protection at this stage in Australia on people making donations to these crowdfunding appeals. I suspect that some of the governments might be looking at doing that because there's been a few issues of late which have raised a few eyebrows as to what is going on. There was a lady charged in Queensland for misrepresenting that she had a very serious illness, and she raised a sum of money, and I think the courts have taken action against her, and that included a jail term. So maybe the law is catching up, but the main reason we want to have this conversation today is on crowdsource funding equity raising. This is where the company can raise up to $5 million. It issues shares to the investors, so they become shareholders. The company obviously has a board of directors and a leadership team, and the shareholders will receive at least an annual report, although my recommendation to the companies that I'm advising on this process is that they should be communicating with their shareholders at least once a quarter, tell them what's going on, keep them informed so that they can become advocates for the company out in the broader marketplace. It's an interesting process. Companies need to do some preparation though. Every company will need a business plan, budget and cash flow forecast, and a marketing plan, a market analysis, and an understanding of the legal issues relating to raising capital as a crowdsource funding company. So it's a great process.
And
it's great for the companies, and it's great for accountants.
Exactly. So we can help them prepare for this process. I wanted to talk about the advantage. One significant advantage of crowdsource equity fundraising is that the company does not have to offer an asset as a security, and nor there are personal guarantees required from the directors.
Yes, well, that's one of the key issues on borrowing, isn't it? That you've got to offer security. Some companies won't have that security because they looking at, they haven't got a spare asset, and where do they get that security from? The personal guarantees, well, they're something that always attaches to private companies. So the banks want them, and then they've got to front up and every month make a principal and interest repayment to the bank or to the lender. So in crowdsource funding equity raising, you don't have any of those issues. You've got some slightly different issues. Of course, you've got a responsibility to your shareholders to manage that investment that you've received from them to the best of your ability. And if anyone's going to receive dividends, well, they have to be paid across all the shareholders. And generally, you would be looking to work as a company to add value, which will be beneficial to all of the shareholders, the crowdsource funding equity raising shareholders, as well as the original people who started this company.
From the shareholders' point of view, is that crowdsource funding assists with wealth creation in the long run, and so also supports the company to become successful.
Yes, that's right. It's a great concept.
So let's get to the next. I don't have slides again.
Yeah, we're just moving on. Yeah.
I can do the slides if you wish. I can take the slides.
No, you've got them there now.
All right. So We talked about Australian Business Growth Fund when we first tackled this subject a few months ago. So is there any new developments with the Australian Business Growth Fund?
Not that I'm aware of. The government had originally indicated that they hope to have this new entity in operation by the end of this year. They secured capital contributions from the banks of over $500 million. $540 million, I think, was contributed by the banks. And they appointed the chair of the board, who was the ex-Tasmanian Premier. The last thing I read, which was back in about August, September, was that he was out looking to hire a chief executive officer. And the Treasurer said that he was going to finalise the appointment of the members of the board. I suspect the government's had a few other things on its plate at present, especially the Treasurer. And I don't know whether this is a high priority, but hopefully it is. And hopefully we will see some action next year. The concept was that this entity would invest patient capital, is what the Treasurer referred to it as, into companies that were young but not startups. And I think from memory, the turnover was to be under $20 million of those companies. So it was to help them go through the next uplift stage in their evolution company. I personally would be very surprised if a company that had not gone through a capital raising process at this stage was a recipient of this type of investment. I think it is more likely to be a company that has already raised capital as an early stage innovation company or a crowdsource funding equity raising company, so that they can indicate that they've had some experience of handling external investors. They've hopefully got a sound board of directors with some commercial experience on it besides the founders. And they are ready to hit a new level of activity so that they can go through this scaling up process. And that's really what the government money's for. Now, the government doesn't expect to be an investor through the Australian Business Growth Fund forever. They see their investment period being 4 or 5, maybe 6 years. And hopefully they'll be hoping that something's going to happen at that stage, that they might be able to exit by selling on their shares and then making further investments to a new generation of emerging Australian companies. So that's how that one's going to work. Thanks, Priscilla.
Well, thanks for the update, because it was kind of floating around us. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, so it was kind of floating around us and we didn't know where it went. So now the new government secured loans came around and changed at least once during COVID. What can we expect from those loans?
Yeah, well, originally the Reserve Bank and the government made available, well, the Reserve Bank made available $91 billion. These are big figures, aren't they? And the government made available, I gather, about 12 or 13 billion dollars in a fund that they told the banks was available for them to the end of September, and told them that it was to be loans of a maximum of $250,000 to businesses and under a 20 million turnover, I think from memory, that one. And the money was to be lent at low interest rates. It was 50% guaranteed by the federal government. And the money was to be spent on working capital purposes, because the government's motivation then was to try to assist businesses to keep people employed, to not let them get onto the unemployment lists. At the end of September, the government changed that. Obviously, that original funding had concluded. I might add that that funding was not widely utilized. In fact, I've heard rumors in the marketplace that some banks really avoided it if they could. That might have been because it was unsecured lending to the borrower, no security. So if the Commonwealth's guaranteeing 50%, I suspect that means the banks are wearing the commercial risk on 50% of the debt. I have heard, though, that at least one bank was insisting on personal guarantees from the directors or shareholders or operators of a business. But the new scheme is that the Commonwealth has kept that bulk of that money in place for the banks and other financial institutions. So it's not just banks to be able to utilize. The amount of the loan can be up to $1 million. It is 50% guaranteed by the federal government. It is very low interest. The banks are borrowing it off the Reserve Bank at 0.5%, so they can't do much better than that. I hear they're lending it at around 4%, and it can now be used for any commercial purpose. So it's not just restricted to working capital. So a borrower could go and use this money to buy a new business, build a new factory, or whatever. It's there. How strong banks are pushing it, I'm not sure. The Commonwealth Bank, I've noticed, have been promoting it, but I've been told a couple of other banks it's very much in the bottom drawer. But for any of our accountants watching this or SMEs, if you want to get a grant, a loan, that's 50% guaranteed by the federal government, raise it with your bank and have a discussion with them, and point out to them that you know that these funds are available.
Yeah, so going to the next topic was that what about research and development incentives from the government? So you've done quite a lot of work and quite a lot of support work for the small business in research and development area. There's incentives in there, which we are aware, but maybe some small business are not. Some small business had the chance to do research and development during COVID because of the, they had a chance to take a step back and think and rethink strategies or come up with ideas. So I think COVID did actually generate a bit of those new products and ideas.
Yes, I think that's starting to emerge. I'm getting phone calls from our accounting subscribers all over Australia who are saying, well, how's the new research and development product going? Because we got people who are coming to talk to us about research and development. Well, the good news, first of all, our new research and development program product package will be finished in about 2 weeks. So we're really launching it in mid-January. Our subscribers will have it in 2 weeks' time, and we'll be running various training courses in mid-January onwards. Research and development's been something that's been a bit of a political football in the last few years, but I think COVID-19's had an effect on it. The government has now stated in their recent budget that they are not going to make any further changes to research and development. They had signalled in the 2019 federal budget that they were going to make some changes, primarily to affect the top end of town, which probably doesn't really worry people who are watching this presentation. But the good news for small businesses is that if your turnover is under $20 million, you are able to claim 43.5% of your legitimate research and development expenditure on as a research and development incentive rebate, and that's very good. The key thing, though, is you have to abide by the requirements of the system, and the government's legislation is based on an assumption that businesses will conduct research and development activities very similar to what you'd expect a university to be undertaking. So there needs to be an identification of an issue, and then there needs to be some search to make sure that there's not prior art or prior literature on what you're going to do, because the government is trying to supply you with funding to undertake research and development that is unique, that is going to develop new knowledge. So there is a process, companies can work through it. I've just finished a project where the company, which is only a small business, has already been paid back over $900,000 in their research and development rebate payment. If a company is trading at a loss, which that company was, the government has legislated for the tax office to pay that rebate to the company's bank account within 30 days of the tax return being lodged. And that worked. The money was paid to the company, so they're happy. So it's a great opportunity for accountants to have a good look at R&D. It doesn't have to be handed on to external consulting firms or big four firms. Smaller accounting firms, I think, can handle it.
I've seen it in action, and they're asking for a tax agent to be available. So tax agent to sign off those papers, and that's all it needs. You don't have to be a
to sign off, you've got to be a tax agent, yes.
Yes. So that's all it needs. It doesn't need to be a multi-million-dollar accounting firm or anything. It is, we can have them with your tools, which you developed. I know that you've done quite a lot of work on this area, and it's amazing, valuable work for us. So what about early stage innovation companies? Now, you do like to talk about those quite a lot.
Yeah, well, I think they're important. And unfortunately, I don't think enough people know about them, Priscilla. And this is one of the reasons we're having these conversations I'm having this conversation every week with our affiliates.
Yeah, to raise awareness between accountants and to raise awareness for small business and how we support them. So we love early stage innovation companies, don't we?
Yes. Well, let's just go back to the beginning very quickly. In December 2015, the then Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, who is very supportive of emerging businesses and new technology, it's where he made his own fortune from, that I can work out, introduced the concept that the government was going to create some new types of entities. One was crowdsource funding, equity raising. The other one was early stage innovation companies. The legislation was introduced to Parliament on the same day. They got separated in the parliamentary process. Early stage innovation companies became law about 8 months before crowdsource funding, equity raising, for reasons I don't really understand, other than it was all politics. Okay, let's look at early stage innovation companies. The government specifically put it in to act as a carrot to investors to look at investing in companies who were young, who had developed new products, processes, and services. Now, someone rang me the other day and said, does young mean that I've got to be early 20s? I said, no, it's not you. You can be 80 it's the company age. So the company age primarily is under 3 years of age. The directors can be any age. And I don't know if this guy was pulling my leg or was serious, but that was an interesting aspect, because we keep on saying young. Well, it's young companies, not young people. And the company needs to have a turnover of less than $200,000. So it's literally done nothing. And a expenditure under $1 million. And if it's done that, it can then move into the next phase where there's the requirement to go through 2 tests. One's called the gateway test, which the company has to earn 100 points from answering questions. There's points allocated to the various questions. And if you pass that, you're accepted as an early stage innovation company. If you can't pass that test, you can then go into what's called the principles test. And the principles test has got 5 questions, and the company needs to be able to supply answers. So we're looking at, is the company committed to doing further work on this concept? Is the concept marketable? Is the concept able to attract investors? And if the company passes the test, there's a report issued by the tax office saying that they've approved the company, and the company can then talk to investors. And the benefit for an investor is that if they invest, they receive 20% of their investment off their tax bill as a rebate, up to a maximum amount of $200,000 for a sophisticated investor. So 20%, they can invest up to $1 million. They can invest more, but the rebate cuts out at $200,000. And if they're a retail investor, they receive a rebate of $10,000 maximum, which is calculated on the maximum investment of $50,000 for a retail investor. And if they hold those shares for longer than 12 months, they avoid paying capital gains tax. So it's a great scheme to encourage people. There's quite a lot of money getting raised by these companies around Australia. They're operating a little bit under the radar, but they are raising money, and they've all developed new products, processes, services, marketing, or management methodologies. So it's great for Australia.
Right. So what should small business that are interested in reviewing the opportunities of alternative capital raising, what should the small business do next?
Well, I think they should talk to you, or should talk to their accountant and ask them. Now, unfortunately, not all accountants are aware of these opportunities for SMEs, because they're sitting there concentrating on taxation issues. And there's been a lot of them in this 12 months, hasn't there, with all the JobKeeper and all the other reports that are required to help keep clients afloat. So if a listener or viewer can't get satisfaction, by all means, please go to our website, www.essbiztools.com.au.
We can bring the slide up where
yeah,
the
I'll
last
just go
slide,
to that now. Okay.
and we can show them where they can find us. Your website is that's the last one, so they can.
Okay, so I'm just going to bring that up now. So that's on the screen now. So you can go to the ESS Small Business website, or accountants can contact us on the ESS BizTools website, or they can contact you direct, Priscilla. There's the Cloud9 Associates a bit further up.
Yes, we give them an initial free consultation when we're gonna realize how we can help them. So because there's so many alternatives these days, we started with 3, then we ended with 5. And there might be much more in there when we look into grants and more things what government offers. There's always something we can do for them, and they should reach out to us. And we are reaching out to you, Peter, to your tools, which they help us in our work.
Yeah, well, it's a combination of looking at grants that are available, which starts with research and development to start with. If someone's been doing research and development, getting their systems in place, they really should have done that at the very beginning. But as long as they've kept some records, the system can be appropriately created. They can then look at a grant like Accelerating Commercialisation, which we really haven't considered today, but it's a grant that is there to help someone in the post-research and development activity, what the government calls the commercialisation phase. That's a grant of up to $1 million on a 50-50 basis. We then have early stage innovation companies, which really like working with people who have done research and development, first of all. And we've also discussed today crowdsource funding equity raising, which might be the capital raising mechanisms that's used. If the company's a little bit more than a young company, it might already have turnover at 200. I had one yesterday I was looking at $285,000 income. It's not going to be eligible as an early stage innovation company. very favorable, I think, for crowdsource funding equity raising. And we've also got the new Australian government initiative, the Australian Business Growth Fund, which I think will be operational next year. But I suspect that will be primarily targeting at people who have already done their first round of capital raising somewhere. So it's a good time.
Yes, thanks, Peter, for joining us.
Yeah,
And
well, yeah.
thanks for joining us. And we'll be back with a session which we're gonna encourage accountants to support small business. Our next session is gonna be about that, how accountants can actually step in and support with their services the small business.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Priscilla. And next
Thanks
week's
for your time, and we do appreciate your expertise.
that's all right. Yeah, next week's session, I'll be talking to Mark Holton, who's a director of Smith Inc. and a very experienced accountant. And we're going to be talking about issues concerning getting ready for 2021. So now that particular broadcast next week is on at 11 a.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Time, 10 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. It's an experiment to just see if the change of time is more convenient to people. You can also access the recordings from this presentation today, which will be available on the ESS BizTools website from tomorrow. And those of you who are subscribers to ESS BizTools or listed on our normal communications, you will be receiving the recording from this video next week when we send out Accountants Minute. So thank you very much. Thanks, Priscilla, for your contribution today.
Our attendees, and thanks for Peter joining us today.
Okay, thank you. Have a great day. Goodbye.
See you next time.